You ever get that feeling that you've heard a story before, even if the details are completely different? Well, today we're diving into a really powerful concept called structural isomorphism. It's basically a method for seeing the hidden connections between things that seem like total opposites, like, say, ancient myth and modern science. It's all about stripping away the surface noise to see they're talking about the exact same thing. You know, we're always taught that myth and science are just fundamentally at war with each other. But what if that whole conflict is just a giant misunderstanding? What if, when you really get down to it, they're not enemies at all? What if they're just two different languages trying to tell the very same story? So, what's really going on here? Well, you could say we're in the middle of a massive, lost-in-translation crisis. We've kind of forgotten that different worldviews, like religion and science, can just be parallel dialects. We get so hung up arguing about the specific words, the symbols, that we totally miss the message underneath it all.
All right, think about it like this. On one side, you've got the language of myth, right? It's all about gods, the voids, spiritual journeys. And on the other, you have the language of science, talking about systems, constraints, and entropy. They sound like they're from different planets. And that's the trap. We get stuck on the alphabets, the words themselves, and we don't even consider that they might be describing the exact same machinery.
Okay, so how do we bridge this gap? How do we start seeing the connection? Step 1 is all about learning to spot the hidden pattern. This is the key. You have to train yourself to ignore the specific labels, the cultural packaging, and instead look for the repeating, functional sequence that pops up in literally any system.
And here it is. This is the universal pattern. Think about it for a second. Pretty much any system you can imagine follows these 4 stages. It starts with stability, right? A balanced state. That balance is managed by some kind of control interface. But then stress inevitably comes along, and that leads to a breakdown. And finally, out of that collapse, you get a reconfiguration into a new, totally different kind of stability. Stability, control, breakdown, rebuild. It's the life cycle at, well, everything.
And I want to be super clear here. This is not just some neat little theory. No way. This is a kind of fractal architecture that repeats itself on every single scale of reality. I'm talking from the way your own brain learns something new, all the way up to the collapse of an empire, or even the grand cycles of the entire cosmos. This 4-stage pattern is everywhere. It's like the fundamental operating system for reality itself.
So once you learn how to spot this universal pattern, what's next? Well, step 2 is where it gets really cool. You apply something called an isometric overlay. Honestly, the best way to think of it is like a Rosetta Stone, but for ideas. It's a key that lets you translate the language of one system directly into another. And this is absolutely crucial. An isometric overlay is not just some fuzzy metaphor where one thing is kind of like another. Nope, it is a precise one-to-one mapping of concepts. You can take a term from a spiritual text, figure out its exact job within that 4-stage pattern, and then map it directly to the scientific term that does the exact same functional job. Let's make this totally concrete. Take the ancient Gnostics. They talked about archons, or false gods, that create rules and constraints in the world. Sounds pretty mystical, right? But with an overlay, you can see that archons map perfectly onto what modern science calls regulatory systems, the rules that govern a system. Or their idea of the void, that's a perfect match for system collapse. You see? These aren't just loose stories. They're describing the exact same functional roles, just with a totally different alphabet.
Now, when you put these 2 steps together, finding the universal pattern and then using the overlay to translate, you get the final tool, and it's not some physical device. It's something way, way more powerful. It's a mental framework for understanding reality itself.
We can call this the structural isomorphism machine. It's a whole process that lets you just strip away all the distracting language, all the cultural noise, and see the single, unchanging architecture that drives all of reality. It's like having X-ray vision for ideas, letting you see the blueprint underneath all the paint. And this, right here, is the ultimate takeaway. The real, objective truth isn't found in the specific names or symbols or stories that any one system uses. All of that is just cultural packaging. The real truth is in the unchangeable mathematical structure that repeats itself over and over and over again, no matter what we decide to call it. So why does all this matter? Because with a tool like this, we can finally get past all this surface-level disagreements. We can stop arguing over the symbols and start a real conversation about the single, unified machine that both science and spirituality have been trying to describe this whole time.
So I'll leave you with a question to chew on. If myth and science are just 2 dialects describing the same reality, what other opposites in our world are just different descriptions of the exact same machine? In politics, in art, in philosophy. How many of our biggest arguments are just about the different words we use to describe the same thing?